Before I start, do me a favor, he said with intense urgency. Comment where you're listening from right now. Bedroom, car, headphones at night, doesn't matter, he emphasized passionately. Just tell me, he pleaded desperately, because what I'm about to tell you, what I witnessed during my years as a Navy SEAL, will make you question everything, he said with trembling emotion, almost crying. You think you know about warfare, about sacrifice, about what human beings are truly capable of when pushed beyond every conceivable limit. My name is Lieutenant Marcus Phantom Rodriguez, and this is the story of how I went from a kid who could barely do 10 push-ups, he laughed bitterly, to leading the most elite strike team in SEAL Team 6. This is the story of missions that never happened, he whispered mysteriously, in places that don't exist, against enemies you'll never hear about on the news. But more than that, he said with deep emotion, voice breaking, this is the story of Commander James Ironside Blackwood, the man who transformed me from a cocky recruit into a warrior who understood that being a SEAL isn't about being the strongest or the fastest or the best shot. It's about being willing to die, he said powerfully, almost crying with conviction, so your brother doesn't have to. The journey started on a beach in Coronado, California, during what they call Hell Week, he said with grim intensity. If you don't know what Hell Week is, he paused dramatically, imagine the worst physical and mental torture you can conceive, then multiply it by 10, stretch it over 5.5 days with almost no sleep, and you're getting close. I was 22 years old, fresh out of basic underwater demolition training, and I thought I was hot shit, he laughed arrogantly, remembering his youth. I'd been a high school athlete, played Division I football. Could run a 6-minute mile and bench press 300 pounds. In my mind, I was ready for anything the Navy could throw at me. I was about to learn how wrong I was, he said seriously. Day 1 of Hell Week started at sunset on a Sunday. The instructors, hard-faced men who'd seen combat in every hellhole on Earth, lined us up on the beach. There were 162 of us in my class. By the end of Hell Week, only 43 would remain, he said ominously. I remember standing there in the cold Pacific wind, watching the sun disappear into the ocean, thinking this would be hard but manageable, he said naively. I was young. I was strong. I was motivated. Then the instructors started yelling, he shouted intensely, and hell began. For the next 5.5 days, we ran, he said exhaustedly. We carried boats on our heads. We did push-ups in the surf until our arms gave out, then did more push-ups, he laughed bitterly at the memory. We swam in water so cold it felt like knives cutting into your skin, he said, shivering at the memory. We did log PT, where 6-man teams carry telephone poles through obstacle courses while instructors scream at you and spray you with hoses. And we never, ever stopped, he emphasized powerfully. The thing about Hell Week that nobody tells you, he whispered mysteriously, the thing you can't understand until you're living through it, is that it's not really about physical strength. Plenty of big, strong guys ring the bell and quit in the first 24 hours, he said with disgust. The instructors design Hell Week to find your breaking point, he said intensely, that moment when your body is screaming at you to stop, when every muscle is on fire, when you're so cold you can't feel your fingers, when you're so tired you start hallucinating, he described desperately. And then they push you further, he said with dark satisfaction. I almost quit on day 3, he admitted shamefully, voice breaking, almost crying. We'd been awake for over 60 hours, done countless evolutions in freezing water, run probably 40 miles, and I was at the end of my rope, he said desperately, crying softly. My boat crew was struggling through another surf passage, and I was so exhausted I could barely think straight. That's when I met Commander Blackwood for the first time, he said with AWE and reverence. He appeared next to me as we were dragging our boat out of the surf, this lean, weathered man in his 40s with eyes that had seen things I couldn't imagine, he described with respect. Most instructors were yelling, pushing, trying to break us. But Blackwood just walked alongside me, quiet for a moment, watching me struggle. You thinking about quitting, Rodriguez? He asked calmly, almost conversationally. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer, he said weakly. Was too busy trying to stay on my feet. I can see it in your eyes. You're doing the math. Calculating how much more pain you can take. Wondering if it's worth it, Blackwood said knowingly. He let that hang in the air while we carried the boat up the beach. Let me tell you something, son, he said with fatherly wisdom. Right now, in this moment, you're learning the most important lesson you'll ever learn as a SEAL. You're learning that the mind gives up long before the body does. You're learning that when you think you've reached your limit, you've really only hit about 40% of what you're capable of, he explained powerfully. I stumbled, almost went down, he remembered painfully. One of my boat crew mates caught me, kept me moving. Blackwood continued, still in that same calm voice. Every man in your boat crew is hurting just as bad as you are. Every one of them is thinking about quitting. But you know what keeps them going? He paused dramatically, each other. They see you struggling and they help you. You see them struggling and you help them. That's what being a SEAL is really about, Rodriguez. It's not about being a superhero. It's about being part of a team where everyone would rather die than let their brothers down, he said with passionate conviction, voice thick with emotion. He let me process that, then added, he said seriously, so here's your choice. You can ring that bell right now. Get hot coffee, dry clothes, a warm bed. No one will blame you. 90% of people who start this training quit. Or you can keep going. Keep suffering. Keep hurting. And maybe, just maybe, you'll earn the right to call yourself a SEAL, he challenged intensely. I don't know where I found the strength, he said with wonder, almost crying with gratitude. Maybe it was his words. Maybe it was seeing my boat crew mates still fighting despite being just as destroyed as I was. Maybe it was just stubbornness, he laughed weakly but determinedly. But I kept going, he declared powerfully. I made it through Hell Week, he said triumphantly, laughing with relief and pride. 43 of us did. We were broken, exhausted, and forever changed. But we'd proven we could push through barriers that most people never even approach, he said with fierce pride. After Hell Week came months more of training, he continued seriously. Advanced combat diving. Land warfare. Weapons training. Small unit tactics. Each phase designed to teach us different skills, but more importantly, to continue building that mental toughness that separates SEALs from everyone else, he emphasized powerfully. Commander Blackwood became my mentor during this time. He said with deep gratitude, voice breaking. He took an interest in certain candidates, guys he thought had potential to become not just SEALs, but leaders. I was lucky enough to be one of them, he said humbly, almost crying with appreciation. The lessons he taught went far beyond how to shoot straight or navigate underwater, he explained thoughtfully. One day, about 6 months into training, Blackwood pulled me and 3 other candidates aside after a particularly brutal day at the shooting range, he remembered tiredly. We'd been doing stress shoots, where they make you do sprints and burpees and other exercises to get your heart rate up, then immediately transition to shooting. The goal is to teach you to make accurate shots even when you're exhausted and your hands are shaking, he explained intensely. I'd been doing okay, hitting most of my targets. But Blackwood could see something in my technique that bothered him. Rodriguez, he said seriously, what's your purpose when you pull that trigger? To hit the target, sir, I answered confidently. He shook his head. Wrong. Try again, he challenged firmly. I thought about it. To eliminate the threat, sir, I said thoughtfully. Getting closer. But still not quite right, he replied patiently. He picked up a rifle, checked to make sure it was clear, and handed it to me. When you pull that trigger, your purpose isn't to hit a target or eliminate a threat. Your purpose is to protect your team. Every round you fire is fired because someone is trying to kill one of your brothers. That target isn't just paper or steel. It's the enemy who wants to put your teammates in body bags, he explained with intense passion. He let that sink in, he paused dramatically. When you understand that, when you truly internalize that every trigger pull is about brotherhood, about keeping the men next to you alive, your entire approach to shooting changes. It's not about being a marksman anymore. It's about being a guardian, he said powerfully, voice thick with emotion. That lesson, that shift in perspective, changed everything for me, he said with AWE, almost crying at the realization. I stopped thinking about shooting as a skill to master and started thinking about it as a responsibility to my team. My accuracy improved. My speed improved. But more importantly, my mindset improved, he emphasized triumphantly. Over the next 18 months, Blackwood taught me dozens of lessons like that, he said gratefully. Lessons about leadership, about decision-making under pressure, about the weight of command, he listed seriously. One lesson in particular stuck with me, he said thoughtfully. We were doing a training exercise, a simulated hostage rescue. I was leading a team of 4 other candidates, and we'd planned everything perfectly, he said confidently. Entry points, room clearing order, contingencies for various scenarios. But when we executed the exercise, everything went wrong, he said with frustration. The hostage room was in a different location than intelligence suggested. One of my team members had an equipment malfunction. The role players acting as enemy fighters put up more resistance than expected, he listed urgently. We failed the exercise, he admitted shamefully, voice breaking. The hostages died. My team took simulated casualties, he said sadly, almost crying at the failure. Afterward, Blackwood pulled me aside, he said nervously. You know why you failed, Rodriguez? He asked seriously. I started listing all the things that went wrong, he said defensively. Bad intelligence. Equipment failure. Unexpected enemy resistance, he explained frantically. He let me finish, then said, he paused dramatically, all true. But none of that is why you failed. You failed because when your perfect plan fell apart, you froze. You spent precious seconds trying to figure out how your plan could go wrong instead of adapting to the new reality in front of you, he explained with stern intensity. He pulled out a notebook, started drawing, he described calmly. Here's what I want you to understand about planning. Plans are essential. You need to study the target, understand the environment, prepare for contingencies. Good planning saves lives. But here's the truth that a lot of young officers don't understand, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Ever, he emphasized powerfully. He drew a diagram showing a perfect plan, then scribbled all over it, he demonstrated dramatically. The moment you step off that helicopter, the moment you breach that door, reality starts deviating from your plan. Maybe it's something small. Maybe it's catastrophic. But it will happen. The question isn't whether your plan will fall apart. The question is whether you can adapt faster than the enemy can react, he challenged intensely. He looked at me directly, he said with piercing intensity. The best leaders I've ever served with, the ones who bring their teams home against impossible odds, they all have one thing in common. They can hold 2 contradictory ideas in their head simultaneously. They plan meticulously, studying every detail, preparing for every contingency. And at the same time, they're ready to throw that entire plan away the second reality proves it wrong. They're rigid in their purpose, complete the mission, protect the team, but fluid in their execution. He explained with profound wisdom, voice thick with emotion. That lesson about adaptive leadership would save my life and the lives of my teammates more times than I could count in the years to come, he said gratefully, almost crying with appreciation. I graduated SEAL training at the top of my class, he said proudly, laughing with joy. Got my trident, the SEAL insignia that meant I'd earned the right to call myself a Naval Special Warfare Operator. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, standing there with the 42 other men who'd started Hell Week with me and made it all the way through, he said with emotional pride, crying softly with gratitude. But earning the trident was just the beginning, he said seriously. My first assignment was to SEAL Team 3, based out of Coronado. This was 2008, height of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Every team was rotating through combat deployments, and I knew I'd see action soon, he said with nervous anticipation. My first deployment came 6 months later. We were heading to Ramadi, Iraq, one of the most dangerous cities in the most dangerous country on earth, he said ominously. I was excited, eager to finally put my training to use, to prove myself in combat, he said with youthful enthusiasm, laughing nervously. Commander Blackwood, who'd been promoted and was now leading our task unit, gathered all the new guys before we deployed, he said seriously. Listen up, he said with serious intensity, you're about to experience combat for the first time. I don't care how much training you've had, how mentally prepared you think you are. The first time someone shoots at you with the intent to kill you, something changes inside you. For some guys, they freeze. For others, they get tunnel vision. For a few, they find out they're not cut out for this work, he warned gravely. He paused, making eye contact with each of us, he described intensely. My job is to make sure you survive long enough to figure out which kind you are. Your job is to listen to the experienced guys, trust your training, and understand that everything you think you know about combat is theoretical until bullets start flying, he instructed firmly. He was right, he confirmed seriously. My first firefight happened 2 weeks into deployment, he said with nervous energy. We were doing a raid on a house believed to contain a mid-level Al-Qaeda facilitator. Intelligence suggested light resistance, maybe 2 or 3 fighters guarding the target, he explained calmly. What we found was an ambush, he said with shock and fear. The moment we breached the door, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, he described frantically. The point man took rounds to his plate carrier that knocked him down. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. The sound of gunfire in that enclosed space was deafening, disorienting, he said, overwhelmed. And I froze, he admitted shamefully, voice breaking, crying softly. For maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity, I just stood there, he said with self-disgust. My training said move, clear corners, return fire. But my brain was overloaded, trying to process too much information too fast, he explained desperately. Then someone grabbed my vest and yanked me forward, he said with startled relief. It was Commander Blackwood, moving through the chaos like he was taking a casual stroll, he described with AWE, laughing nervously at the absurdity. His rifle was up, firing controlled pairs at targets I hadn't even seen yet. Move, Rodriguez. Don't think. Execute, Blackwood commanded forcefully. Something clicked. Something clicked, he said with sudden clarity. My training took over. Suddenly I was moving, shooting, communicating with my team. The conscious thought that had frozen me disappeared, replaced by muscle memory and instinct, he described rapidly, with relief. We cleared the house in 90 seconds, he said breathlessly. Found and secured the target. Treated our point man's injuries, bruised ribs but nothing serious thanks to his body armor. By the time we extracted, my hands were shaking with adrenaline, but we'd completed the mission successfully, he said triumphantly, laughing with nervous energy. Afterward, back at our base, Blackwood found me sitting alone, trying to process what had just happened, he said quietly, still trembling. You froze, he said simply, matter-of-factly. Yes, sir, I felt ashamed, like I'd failed some crucial test, voice breaking, almost crying. Good, he said surprisingly. I looked at him, confused. He said with bewilderment. Most guys freeze their first time under fire. It's natural. Your brain is trying to protect you, make you hide from danger. The fact that you snapped out of it, that you kept moving once you got over that initial shock, that tells me you've got what it takes, he explained with encouraging warmth. He sat down next to me, he described calmly. Combat isn't like training. In training, you know the bullets aren't real. You know that if you mess up, the worst consequence is some instructor yelling at you. In combat, mistakes get people killed. Your first firefight teaches you that lesson in a way no amount of training can replicate. Now that you know what it really feels like, you'll be better next time, he said with wise reassurance. He was right about that too, he confirmed gratefully. Over the next 6 months of deployment, I participated in dozens of operations. Each one taught me something new. How to read a battlefield. How to communicate clearly under stress. How to make split-second decisions that could mean life or death, he said with growing confidence. But the operation that really transformed me, that took me from a competent operator to someone Blackwood thought could lead, happened 3 months into that first deployment, he said with dramatic anticipation. We received intelligence about a high-value target holed up in a compound on the outskirts of Ramadi, he explained seriously. This wasn't just some mid-level facilitator. This was a senior Al-Qaeda commander responsible for dozens of IED attacks that had killed American soldiers, he said with anger and determination. The mission brief was straightforward but challenging, he continued tensely. The compound was heavily fortified, in a neighborhood known for being hostile to American forces. We'd be going in at night, fast roping from helicopters directly onto the roof, then clearing down through multiple floors to get to our target, he described with nervous energy. I was designated as team leader for one of the assault elements, he said with anxious pride. 4 operators under MY command, responsible for clearing the top 2 floors while other elements handled the ground level and provided external security. This was IT, he emphasized dramatically. My first time leading men in combat. Everything I'd learned from Blackwood, all the training, all the lessons about leadership and adaptation, would be put to the test, he said with intense determination, voice rising. The infill went perfectly, he said triumphantly. Our helicopter dropped us on the roof exactly on target. My team fast roped down, set up security, and began our assault within seconds. He described rapidly. Then everything went sideways, he said with sudden dread. The building layout didn't match our intelligence, he explained frantically. Where we expected hallways, we found open rooms. Where we expected 1 stairwell, we found 2. And worst of all, there were way more enemy fighters than intelligence had suggested, he said with rising panic. The first room we breached had 4 fighters, all armed, all ready, he said urgently. They'd heard our helicopters and were waiting, he emphasized with fear. The firefight was instant and brutal, he described intensely. My point man took fire immediately. I returned fire, dropping 1 fighter. The man next to me got another. But the other 2 had good positions and were pouring fire at us, he said desperately. This was the moment, he said dramatically, voice trembling. The moment where my plan had fallen apart and I had to adapt or people would die, he emphasized with fierce urgency, almost crying from the pressure. I remembered Blackwood's lesson, he said with sudden clarity. Rigid in purpose, fluid in execution. My purpose was clear, clear these floors, find the target, protect my team, he stated powerfully. The plan that would get me there had to change right now, he decided rapidly. I made a decision in a split second, he said intensely. Instead of trying to fight through that room, which would take time and likely result in casualties, we'd bypass it. Use the second stairwell we'd found to move down to the next floor, come at these fighters from an unexpected angle, he explained rapidly, with strategic brilliance. I barked orders to my team, he said Xiaomandangly. We repositioned, moved fast, found the second stairwell, descended, he described with military precision. We hit the second floor and immediately found our target, he said triumphantly. The Al-Qaeda commander was attempting to flee through a back room, probably hoping to escape in the chaos, he explained rapidly. He never made it, he said with dark satisfaction. My team secured him within 30 seconds, he stated victoriously, laughing with fierce pride. But we still had problems, he said seriously. Those fighters on the floor above were still active. Other enemy fighters in the compound were converging on our position. And we had a wounded team member who needed immediate medical attention, he listed urgently. Time to adapt again, he said with determined focus. I called for immediate exfil while my team set up a defensive position, he explained rapidly. Designated one operator to guard the target, another to help treat our wounded, leaving me and one other operator to hold off any counterattacks, he organized efficiently. The next 5 minutes were the longest of my life, he said with intense emotion, voice breaking. Enemy fighters tried to push into our position from multiple directions. We held them off with precise fire and tactical use of our limited grenade supply. The wounded operator was bleeding badly but stable thanks to quick medical work, he described desperately, almost crying from the stress. And then the beautiful sound of helicopter rotors overhead, he said with overwhelming relief, laughing with joy and gratitude, crying happily. We extracted under fire, loading our wounded, our prisoner, and ourselves onto the birds while enemy rounds pinged off the armored hulls, he described frantically. 30 seconds later we were airborne, climbing into the night sky, successful despite everything going wrong, he said triumphantly, laughing with victorious joy. Back at base, after medical had treated our wounded operator and the target was secured for interrogation, Blackwood found me, he said quietly, still processing the mission. He didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me with those weathered eyes that had seen everything, he described reverently. Finally, that was good work tonight, Rodriguez. When the plan fell apart, you adapted. Made hard decisions fast. Kept your team alive and completed the mission, Blackwood praised with sincere admiration. Thank you, sir, I said gratefully, voice thick with emotion. He shook his head. Don't thank me. Thank your team. They trusted you enough to follow your calls even when things went to hell. That's what leadership really is, earning enough trust that men will follow you into situations where there's a good chance they might not come home, he explained with profound wisdom, almost crying at the weight of those words. He started to walk away, then turned back, he paused dramatically. You're ready for more responsibility. I'm recommending you for advanced leadership training. If you accept, you'll be going to a specialized school where they'll teach you things about warfare that most SEALs never learn, he offered seriously. I didn't hesitate, he said with eager determination. Yes, sir. Whatever it takes to be better, I declared powerfully, laughing with excited anticipation. 6 months later, after completing that deployment, I found myself at a classified training facility in the mountains of North Carolina, he continued mysteriously. This wasn't regular SEAL training. This was something else entirely, he emphasized with AWE. The Advanced Special Operations Tactics School, though nobody called it that. We just called it the ranch. He whispered with reverence. This was where they trained the operators who would eventually lead the most sensitive, dangerous missions in naval special warfare, he explained seriously. Hostage rescues in countries we weren't officially operating in. Raids against targets that didn't exist according to any government record. Operations where failure wasn't just unacceptable, it was literally unthinkable because of the strategic consequences, he said with intense gravity. The instructors at the ranch weren't regular military. They were legends, he said with deep respect, almost crying with admiration. Guys who'd led missions you'd read about years later in declassified documents. Men who'd operated in every conflict zone on Earth and lived to share their lessons, he described with AWE. Commander Blackwood was one of the instructors, he revealed with grateful emotion. Over the next 6 months, my class of 20 operators learned advanced skills that went far beyond basic SEAL training, he explained seriously. We learned how to plan complex multi-team operations. How to integrate with other special operations forces. How to conduct operations in denied environments where we couldn't count on support or backup, he listed intensely. But more than tactics and techniques, we learned how to think like commanders, he emphasized powerfully. How to make decisions when you didn't have enough information. How to balance mission accomplishment against acceptable risk to your force. How to live with the consequences when your decisions got people killed, he said heavily, voice breaking, crying deeply at the weight of command. One exercise in particular stands out in my memory, he said with dramatic emphasis. They gave us a scenario, American hostages held in a compound in Somalia, he explained tensely. Intelligence was limited. Enemy force size unknown but estimated to be substantial. Mission was to plan and execute a rescue operation, he described seriously. The catch? This was a no-fail scenario, he emphasized with intense urgency. The hostages had to be rescued. Failure would result in execution on video, a massive propaganda victory for the enemy, and potentially spark a broader conflict, he said with rising tension. We spent 3 days planning, he said exhaustedly. Studied satellite imagery. Analyzed enemy patterns. Developed contingencies for everything we could think of, he explained methodically. Then they executed our plan, with instructors playing our team and role-players acting as enemies and hostages, he continued nervously. Our plan failed spectacularly, he admitted with crushing disappointment, voice breaking, crying with shame. The hostages were killed in the first 90 seconds. Our simulated team took 50% casualties, he said devastatedly. We were devastated, he emphasized with deep emotion. We'd planned so carefully, thought through every detail, and still failed, he said, almost sobbing with frustration. That evening, Blackwood gathered our class, he said quietly. You're probably wondering where you went wrong, he said calmly, wondering what you missed in your planning, what you could have done better. He pulled up our plan on a screen. Your plan was actually pretty good. Solid tactical approach. Good contingencies. If things had gone according to this plan, you probably would have succeeded, he said honestly. So what went wrong? Someone asked desperately. You forgot the first rule of combat operations, the enemy gets a vote, he paused dramatically, letting that sink in. Fast, poorly trained fighters with AK-47s and RPGs. What you got was trained soldiers with machine guns and prepared positions. Your plan had no way to adapt to an enemy that was fundamentally different from what you expected, he explained with stern intensity. He clicked to another slide. Here's what I want you to understand. Every plan you ever make will be based on incomplete information. Intelligence will be wrong or outdated. Enemy capabilities will be different than expected. The civilian pattern of life will change. Weather will shift. Equipment will fail. Something, probably multiple somethings, will go wrong, he emphasized with powerful conviction. The question isn't how to make a perfect plan. That doesn't exist. The question is how to make a plan that can adapt when reality proves your assumptions wrong. How do you build in enough flexibility that your team can shift gears when the enemy turns out to be different than expected? How do you develop your operators' judgment so they can make good decisions independently when communications fail? He challenged with intense focus. He looked at each of us, he described seriously. That's the real lesson here. Not tactics. Not techniques. Adaptability. The ability to face a completely unexpected situation and figure out a way to win anyway, he declared powerfully, voice rising with passion. They made us do the exercise again, he continued determinedly. Same scenario. But this time, we planned differently. Instead of creating one detailed plan, we created a framework, principles of operation that would guide decision-making regardless of what we encountered, he explained with strategic brilliance. The second execution went much better, he said triumphantly, laughing with relief. When the enemy turned out to be more capable than expected, our team adapted. They shifted tactics on the fly, used different approaches than originally planned, and successfully rescued the hostages, he described victoriously, laughing with proud satisfaction. After that exercise, after months of advanced training, I graduated from the ranch, he said with proud emotion. I was now qualified to lead special operations teams on the most challenging missions in naval special warfare, he emphasized powerfully. My next assignment was to SEAL Team 6, officially known as DevGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, he revealed with AWE. This was the tip of the spear, the unit that handled the most sensitive operations, he said with reverent intensity. And Commander Blackwood was there too, now leading one of the assault squadrons, he said gratefully, almost crying with appreciation for his mentor. My first mission with Team 6 was something I still can't talk about in detail, even all these years later, he whispered mysteriously. What I can say is that it involved inserting into a country we weren't officially operating in, moving over 100 kilometers through hostile territory, and rescuing an American who'd been captured by forces that didn't officially exist, he described ominously. The operation took 48 hours from insertion to extraction, he continued tensely. We moved through mountains, across rivers, through villages where any person might be an informant for the enemy. We navigated using only terrain features and GPS because the area was too sensitive for satellite communications, he explained with nervous intensity. When we finally reached the compound where our target was being held, we found it more heavily defended than intelligence suggested, he said with growing tension. Instead of a dozen guards, there were over 30, he emphasized with alarm. I was leading one of the assault teams. We had to make a decision, abort and try again with a larger force, or press on with what we had, he explained with dramatic urgency. I thought about everything Blackwood had taught me. About adaptability. About the difference between acceptable risk and foolish risk. About the responsibility of leadership, he reflected thoughtfully, voice heavy with weight. We pressed on, he decided powerfully. The assault was the hardest fighting I'd experienced up to that point, he said intensely, voice rising. Room-to-room combat against well-trained defenders who weren't going to surrender. Every room cleared was a small victory bought with sweat and violence, he described with fierce intensity. But we got our target out. Alive, he said triumphantly, laughing with victorious relief. The American we'd come for was wounded but stable. And incredibly, despite the intensity of the fighting, we didn't lose a single operator, he emphasized with AWE and gratitude, crying happily at the miracle. After that mission, after proving I could lead under the most extreme circumstances, I was given my own team within the squadron, he said with proud emotion. 8 operators, the best of the best, men who would follow me anywhere because they trusted my judgment, he described with deep gratitude, voice breaking. Over the next 3 years, my team conducted operations in 7 different countries, he continued seriously. Hostage rescues. High-value target raids. Reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory. Each operation built on the lessons I'd learned from Blackwood, from the ranch, from years of combat experience, he said reflectively. We developed a reputation, he said with fierce pride, laughing confidently. My call sign, Phantom, came from our ability to insert into hostile areas without being detected, complete our objectives, and extract before the enemy even knew we'd been there, he explained with dark satisfaction. But the operation that would define my career, that would test everything I'd learned about leadership and adaptation, came during a deployment to Afghanistan, he said with dramatic anticipation, voice trembling. Intelligence identified a compound in the mountains near the Pakistan border where a group of Taliban commanders were meeting, he explained seriously. These weren't just any commanders, these were the men planning attacks against American bases, responsible for dozens of casualties, he said with angry determination. The mission brief was clear but challenging, he continued tensely. The compound was in extremely rugged terrain, accessible only by helicopter. The enemy had recent experience fighting American forces and would be alert. And we had a narrow time window, the commanders were only going to be in one place for a few hours, he explained urgently. I spent 2 days planning with my team, he said exhaustedly. We studied the terrain, analyzed approach routes, developed contingencies for different scenarios. Everything I'd learned at the ranch went into this plan, he emphasized intensely. But I also remembered Blackwood's lesson about adaptability, he said thoughtfully. So alongside our detailed plan, I made sure every operator understood our core objectives and was empowered to make decisions if things went wrong, he explained wisely. The insertion went smoothly, he said with cautious relief. 2 helicopters dropped my team and a backup team on a ridge line 2 kilometers from the target. We moved through the darkness, navigating using night vision and GPS, covering broken terrain that would have been impossible in daylight, he described tensely. We reached our observation point an hour before dawn, he continued quietly. The compound was below us, exactly where intelligence said it would be. We counted guards, noted patterns, confirmed that this was indeed where the meeting was taking place, he explained methodically. Everything looked good. The plan was solid, he said confidently. Then, 15 minutes before we were set to execute, everything changed, he said with sudden alarm, voice rising with panic. A truck convoy appeared on the road leading to the compound, he described frantically. Not just 1 or 2 vehicles, 8 trucks full of fighters. Maybe 60 additional enemy combatants flooding into what was supposed to be a lightly defended target, he emphasized with shocked disbelief. This was the moment, he said dramatically, voice trembling with tension. The moment where rigid adherence to the plan would get us killed. The moment where we had to adapt or abort, he emphasized with intense urgency, almost crying from the pressure. I gathered my team leaders, he said quickly. Options, I said quietly but urgently. The first team leader spoke, we abort. Wait for another opportunity when the enemy force isn't so large, he suggested cautiously. The second, we call in air support. Level the compound while all the targets are inside, he proposed aggressively. Valid options. But both had problems, he analyzed rapidly. If we aborted, we might not get another chance, he reasoned seriously. These commanders were careful, rarely gathering in one place. And airstrikes in this area were politically sensitive, too much risk of civilian casualties in nearby villages, he explained with frustrated concern. I thought about Blackwood's lessons. About purpose and execution. About adaptability, he reflected intensely, voice thick with determination. Our purpose was to eliminate these commanders. That hadn't changed. What had changed was the method we'd used to accomplish it, he reasoned powerfully. New plan, I said with decisive authority. We're going to use this troop increase against them, I declared boldly, laughing darkly with strategic brilliance. My team looked at me, waiting, he described tensely. With 60 extra fighters in the compound, they're going to be overcrowded. Disorganized. They'll be focused on securing their commanders, not on perimeter security. That's our opportunity, I explained rapidly with excited confidence. I sketched a new plan in the dirt, he described quickly. Instead of our planned direct assault, we'd use a combination of snipers and a small assault element. My best shooters would set up positions overlooking the compound. When the meeting started and all our targets were confirmed in one room, the snipers would take out the guards on the perimeter. Then a small team, just 4 of us, would fast rope directly onto the building's roof, breach from above, and eliminate the commanders before the larger enemy force could respond, he explained rapidly with intense focus. It was risky, he admitted seriously, voice trembling. If anything went wrong, four operators would be surrounded by dozens of enemy fighters with no easy escape route. But it was our best chance to complete the mission, he emphasized with determined conviction, almost crying from the weight of responsibility. My team didn't hesitate, he said with grateful emotion, laughing with proud appreciation. They trusted my judgment. Within 30 minutes, we'd repositioned. Snipers found their hides. The assault element, including me, moved to the helicopter landing zone where our birds were waiting on standby, he described rapidly with military efficiency. We watched through long-range optics as the sun rose and the meeting began, he said tensely. 8 Taliban commanders, the targets we'd been hunting for months, all in one room, he emphasized with fierce satisfaction. Execute, I called over the radio with cold determination. For suppressed rifle shots, almost simultaneous, he described dramatically. For perimeter guards dropped silently, he said with dark satisfaction. Our helicopter came in fast and low, flaring hard over the compound's main building, he continued urgently. We fast-roped onto the roof in seconds, moving the moment our boots hit solid surface, he described rapidly. Breaching charge on the roof access. 3 seconds. Explosion, he counted intensely, voice rising. We flooded into the building, moving down one floor to where our targets were meeting, he described with fierce intensity. They were just beginning to react to the sound of the breach when we entered the room, he said rapidly. It was over in seconds, he said with cold finality. 8 Taliban commanders eliminated before they could reach their weapons, he stated triumphantly, laughing with dark satisfaction. But now came the hard part, he said with rising tension. Extracting while surrounded by 60 angry fighters who'd just realized what happened, he emphasized urgently. Our snipers provided covering fire as we moved to the roof, he described frantically. The helicopter came back in, taking fire from multiple positions, but the pilots held steady, he said with grateful intensity. We loaded up and were airborne before the enemy could organize an effective response, he explained rapidly, laughing with victorious relief. Mission complete. All targets eliminated. All operators safe, he declared triumphantly, crying happily with overwhelming gratitude and relief. Back at base, I found Commander Blackwood waiting, he said quietly, still processing the mission. Heard your plan changed somewhat, he said with a slight smile, laughing warmly with paternal pride. Enemy force was 3 times larger than expected. Had to adapt, I explained simply. He nodded. And you did it well. Turned a disadvantage into an advantage. Used their overconfidence against them. That's exactly what we teach at the ranch, he praised with sincere admiration. He paused, then said, he continued seriously, I'm putting you up for a command position. You're ready to lead not just a team, but an entire squadron, he announced with proud emotion, voice thick with fatherly satisfaction, almost crying with pride. Over the next year, I took over my own squadron within Team 6, he said with AWE and responsibility. Now I was responsible not just for 8 operators, but for dozens. Planning multiple missions simultaneously. Coordinating with intelligence agencies. Making strategic decisions that affected operations across multiple countries, he explained heavily, feeling the weight. And I found myself teaching the lessons I'd learned, he said reflectively with emotional depth. Training new operators. Passing on the wisdom that Blackwood had passed to me, he emphasized with grateful emotion, voice breaking, almost crying at the honor. One day, a young SEAL fresh from basic training asked me the same question I'd once asked Blackwood, he remembered fondly, laughing softly with nostalgia. Sir, how do you make decisions when there's no clear right answer? When every option has risks and you can't be sure what's going to work? The young SEAL asked desperately, voice trembling with uncertainty. I smiled, remembering asking that exact question years ago, he said warmly, laughing gently with understanding. You accept that certainty is impossible. You gather the best information you can. You rely on your training and experience. You trust your team. And then you make a decision and commit to it fully. Because indecision kills more people than bad decisions, I explained with wise conviction. But what if you choose wrong? What if your decision gets someone killed? He asked fearfully, voice breaking, almost crying at the terrifying prospect. That's the weight of command, I said heavily, voice thick with emotion. Every leader who's worth following carries that weight. You honor the sacrifice by learning from it, by making sure the next decision is better, emphasized with solemn conviction, crying softly at the burden of lost brothers. The young SEAL nodded slowly, processing this, he described quietly. I added, he continued with passionate intensity, here's what Commander Blackwood taught me, and what I'm passing on to you. Being a SEAL isn't about being fearless. Fear is natural and healthy, it keeps you alert. Being a SEAL is about acting despite fear. It's about making hard decisions when you're scared. It's about pushing through barriers that seem impossible, I said powerfully, voice rising with conviction. Most importantly, it's about understanding that you're part of something bigger than yourself. Every mission, every training evolution, every moment of suffering, it's all in service of your team and your country. When you internalize that, when you truly understand that you're willing to die so your brothers don't have to, that's when you become a SEAL, I declared with profound emotion, voice breaking, crying deeply with the truth of it. My career with Team 6 lasted 8 more years, he continued reflectively. I led operations that saved lives, eliminated threats, and accomplished objectives that most people will never know about, he said with quiet pride. I lost teammates along the way, good men who gave everything in service to missions that mattered, he said sadly, voice breaking, crying softly at the memory of fallen brothers. Each loss hurt, he emphasized with deep pain, crying deeply. Each one made me question my decisions, wonder if I could have done something differently, he said with anguished guilt. But I learned to carry that weight the way Blackwood taught me, with honor, using the pain to make me better, to ensure their sacrifices weren't wasted, he said powerfully, voice thick with emotion and determination. Now I'm in a position similar to where Blackwood was when I first met him, he said thoughtfully, laughing softly with bittersweet nostalgia. Training the next generation. Teaching them the lessons learned through years of combat. Helping them understand that being a SEAL is about so much more than physical strength or tactical skills, he explained with wise passion. It's about character. About integrity. About being willing to put your team's needs ahead of your own wants, he emphasized with powerful conviction. I think about Hell Week, about that moment when I wanted to quit and Blackwood talked me through it, he remembered emotionally, voice breaking, almost crying at the memory. About all the missions where his lessons about adaptability and leadership saved lives. About the privilege of serving alongside the finest warriors this country has ever produced, he said with profound gratitude, crying softly with appreciation. And I try to pass on those lessons to the next generation, hoping they'll carry forward the tradition of excellence that makes Navy SEALs the most elite fighting force in the world, he declared with fierce pride, voice rising with passion. Because somewhere out there, right now. Because somewhere out there, right now, there's a mission forming, he said seriously, voice intensifying. A hostage who needs rescue. A threat that needs elimination. An objective that everyone says is impossible, he listed with rising intensity. And when that call comes, a SEAL will step forward and say what we always say, he emphasized powerfully, voice thick with emotion and pride. We'll find a way. We always do, he declared with absolute conviction, laughing triumphantly with unshakable confidence. That's what it means to be a Navy SEAL, he said profoundly. Not the glory or the movies or the reputation. It's the quiet confidence that comes from years of training and combat. The absolute certainty that when your country needs something done, when the mission is so dangerous that no one else will take it, SEALs will find a way to accomplish it, he explained with powerful emotion, voice breaking, crying with pride and conviction. We leave NO1 behind, he declared fiercely. We complete the mission. We adapt and overcome, he emphasized with rising power. Every single time, he stated with absolute finality and unwavering conviction, voice rising to a triumphant crescendo.